Well, one of the key objectives of the entire G20 process is to ensure that the global economy moves forward, that the rights and the needs of more than 1 billion people, not just in our country, but billions around the world, are reflected. The process over here in Gandhinagar has seen several finance ministers attend. We've seen the heads of the IMF, the World Bank and others be here as well to talk about a little bit on what the agenda this time was, what some of the key concerns are. A wonderful guest, the MD of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva. Thank you, ma'am, very much for being with us. You know, we are in India, so I must start by asking you a question about India. And, you know, in the last time around, the IMF had said that India's 2023 GDP growth, you had projected it at about 5.4%. The actuals achieved last fiscal was about 7%. Do you believe, do you have any concerns specifically on why, you know, your projections were somewhat lower than what we achieved?
In 2022, indeed, India was above 7%, and that is great for India, great for Asia, great for the world. For this year, we are projecting a bit of slowdown to around 6%, and it is not because of India, but because of global growth slowing down. What we are seeing in a very positive light is how good policies are helping India to outperform. 3 factors. 1, digitalization. The fact that India now has digital public infrastructure that serves people and businesses has become a great source of growth. 2, because of that, India is very attractive as an exporter of services, and this is booming.
Yes.
Faster than we anticipated. And 3, very prudent fiscal policy. Yeah. Collecting taxes and then prudently using money. All of this has led to a strong performance of India, making it a bright spot on what has been a rather cloudy horizon over the last years.
We'll talk about the global situation as well, ma'am, but you know, India has this incredible demographic dividend. We are now the most populous nation in the world. Going forward, do you believe that this demographic dividend is going to translate into growth?
Oh, certainly, and it is already translating into growth. One of the competitive strengths of India in the export of services is because of IT prominence and the fact that you generate all this inflow of very skilled people that come into the labor market and step into what is today the highest, the fastest growing industry. I very strongly believe that India has chosen to invest in things that determine great use of the dividend you're talking about. One is research and innovation. In a very real way, India today is reaching for the moon. You know, I hope that soon there would be reports about
yes.
About success in this area. The fact that the education of India is oriented towards skilling people for today and tomorrow, not for the past.
Right.
All of this is contributing to tap into the youthful population of the country and make also another aspect of it is entrepreneurship. Digital public infrastructure, among many other qualities, has allowed young people to take risk, to access money, to capture opportunities. And that entrepreneurial culture, you know, frankly, I see this as very similar to the rocket that went to the moon. It is driving Indian growth.
Ma'am, you know, G20, there are differences as well between nations. We are in a difficult space in the world now with the entire war in Ukraine. Do you believe that a lack of a joint statement, and we've seen this in the past few G20 sessions as well, is problematic, or do you believe that by and large the overall objectives are still being met?
The lack of a communique, of course, is like a paddle in your shoe. It is not good that We can agree on the issues, we can agree on the policies, but we can't agree on the text that is presenting these policies. Nonetheless, India has done an impeccable job in leading, especially in this very complicated time. Why? Because it focused on what really matters to the billions of people around the world. First, coordination on policies. When the same problem hits different countries, if they are not able to come up with the most appropriate policy response, of course the problem would become more severe. In terms of how we deal with inflation, how we deal with fiscal sustainability, how we deal with debt, that coordination has been very powerful. Second, India addresses a major issue, which is how can we generate financing on scale to address climate change, and how the multilateral development banks can transform into a system. And third, digital money. I cannot tell you how excited I am to come to India and sit in one of the round tables about crypto, about CBDC, and how much we advance by having this place.
But you have concerns on crypto, ma'am, don't you?
Of course I have concerns.
There are so many digital concerns.
Of course I'm concerned.
Are you okay with it? Do you believe that crypto shouldn't be there? Or
I have 10,000 concerns. This is how many variants of crypto exist today. We approach it in the following way. First, we look into how we define this.
Yeah.
Is it really money? Well, it may be called Bitcoin. It's not money. When we have, in a sense, a speculative asset, it's an investment risk. If you want to take it, please do, but don't think that this is money. When we look at the universe of crypto, you have stable coins that are backed by assets, and then you have things that are, backed by nothing. Obviously, these are different categories. And what is most concerning to me is we see a lot of appetite to get into crypto in jurisdictions with very weak institutions, very weak policies.
Right.
But then it can go anywhere. So it originates in a weak place, it goes to India and causes damage. So we have to have a clear regulatory framework, and then we have to make it so that they play by the rules that are established in the economy. At the IMF, we are concentrated on the question of tax.
Right.
Well, if you have a crypto investment and you generate capital gains, these gains should be taxed. If you are using crypto to facilitate transaction, that transaction should be also taxed.
Sure.
So we have a lot of work to do. Roll our sleeves, get it done, because this is moving so fast.
It is indeed. Do you believe that there is scope for India and China to do more together to deal with debt-distressed low-income economies?
Certainly. I want to praise the finance minister of India for working very hard on that very issue of debt restructuring. We are co-chairing with the World Bank, the India G20 presidency and the IMF, a global sovereign debt roundtable. The purpose is to bring everybody together. So China is there, Saudi Arabia is there, the Paris Club is there, the private sector is there, but also the debtor countries are there. The fact is, China is a sizable creditor. We have a very massive problem with debt distress. China has to be at the table. We have to engage. And I'm very glad to see India prioritizing this issue in the G20 context.
Just a quick reaction on what has happened in the last, 24, 48 hours. Russia has pulled out of the grain deal. And food inflation is a huge concern across the world, particularly for G20 nations and many other nations. Your thoughts on that? Your concerns on that?
It is irresponsible. We have seen what happened last year. People who have nothing to do with this conflict massively impacted. You have countries like Egypt that are importing wheat from Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah.
All of a sudden that disappears, and that led to prices skyrocketing. It is bad for everybody, but for poor households, it's a devastation.
Yes.
If food prices go up, that means people go hungry.
Yeah.
And I am very, very, very keen to see that there is a progress again, that this is not abandoned. Of course, the world is also looking into other ways to export wheat from Ukraine. They may be costlier, but still that would contribute, especially in the context of climate change.
Yeah.
We cannot afford to be myopic, look at our belly button. The world has to come together.
It does indeed. You know, it's interesting that you speak about climate change. Do we need to, around the world, adopt policies which take into account, you know, what we are seeing? I mean, we had horrible floods in India just last week. Again, we'll never know if there's a direct link to climate change or not. But when the IMF looks at policies of different countries or your own policies, do you believe that climate change is something that needs to be, you know, a central focus?
Categorically, yes. We have adopted about 18 months ago a climate strategy for the IMF. Why? Because climate shocks affect economic performance, but also the transition to the green economy creates opportunities for investments and jobs. And for us, an institution that is focused on macroeconomic financial stability, growth and employment, of course this has to be front and center in our engagements. We now include climate considerations in our health check of country economies, the famous Article 4 consultations, our engagement with countries. We include climate risks in financial stability assessments, because we need to know what are the climate-related risks for the financial system. We bring climate in our data. So when you look at an economy, you look at GDP, employment, deficit, but then you also need to look at carbon intensity, vulnerability to climate shocks, so you can have a comprehensive view of how this economy performs. Mm-hmm. And last but not least, very important, we created a new long-term lending instrument, which is called Resilience and Sustainability Trust, funded by the special drawing rights we distributed in 2021, 650 billion of them. Yeah. So countries with strong reserve positions are now lending through us on concessional terms money to address climate risks.
Yeah. Just a few more questions on the region for us, Pakistan. It's you know, in a very precarious economic situation. The IMF has played a key role, but do you believe that their model of repayment of loans which have been granted by the IMF is sustainable? What more or what else needs to be done for this to be sustainable?
There is a very significant policy reform agenda for Pakistan. Right now we are concentrating on reducing the bleeding of reserves, improving the collection of taxes and public spending. But that is not going to bring sustainability to Pakistan. There has to be a much deeper structural reform package, starting from tax. In Pakistan this year the projection is for 12% of GDP collected as taxes. At the IMF we say if taxes are below, tax to GDP is below 15%, you're in trouble. So obviously that has to be reformed. Very important for Pakistan to create the enabling environment for private investments, to bring more scrutiny to how public money is being spent, independence of the central bank protected so monetary policy can be done properly, and of course looking into why is it that debt levels have gone so high. how we can have more sustainable growth model for the country.
China, some would suggest that there's a lack of confidence in terms of China, which could have had some sort of an impact on their growth numbers. It is somewhat better than it was perhaps a year back. China does remain a driver of the global economy. What are your concerns, and do you actually see a real chance at a revival substantially in the near term of the Chinese economy?
What we see is that this year China is performing definitely much better than last year. Last year, for the first time in 4 decades, China's growth was lower than the global average. This year, it was 3% last year. This year, we project around or slightly above 5%. That is, however, in a situation in which China is impacted both by external factors and by domestic factors. External, higher interest rates, as well as slowing down of global growth, meaning demand for export from China slowing down. Internally, there have been problems in the real estate sector. This is 20% of value added in China.
Yeah.
When there is trouble there, it also erodes domestic confidence, and domestic consumption doesn't grow as fast as it is necessary. China has policy levers they can use.
Yeah.
They can stimulate the economy. They also can rethink some of their key policies, like social protection. If China provides more support in a targeted manner, then what today is a problem of very high savings. Well, you would say high savings, why would it be a problem? It's a problem because it means that people are not spending.
Sure.
And domestic demand is constrained. So addressing these issues can help China to do better. And of course, as always, we would say keep the economy open and continue to strengthen the regulatory environment so private investment in China, Chinese investment, foreign investment can flourish.
You know, we talk about resilient supply chains, particularly in a high-tech industry. India is trying to build our superconductor space in a very big way. Recently, we've had the Prime Minister visit France and the United States earlier on. They're looking to diversify supplies for superconductors and things like that. How important is that for global economic growth and certainly growth in this region?
Very important. What we have seen over the last years is that exogenous shocks can create tremendous negative impact on national economies and on the world economy. What COVID did by interrupting supply chains demonstrated that more resilient supply chains are those that are more diversified. The war, by creating an energy shock, also taught us this lesson that there has to be more reliance on multiple sources. If you are dependent on one source, if this source dries up, then the economy is in trouble. Diversification of supply chains, however, should not lead to fragmenting the world economy.
Right.
Because if we fragment it, if we withdraw into blocks, the cost of everything that we produce and consume would go up.
Yes.
And we know from history that protectionism never takes us to a good place. So at the IMF we actually did some research. How big could that be as cost on the economy? If this security impacted redistribution of supply chain locations is done well, there would be a cost, but it would be very small, 0.2%. If it is done badly, it can be all the way up to 7% of global GDP. That is the equivalent of Germany
huge.
and Japan disappearing from the world economy.
Sure. There's such a raging debate around the world on artificial intelligence and how that might impact the way we work, how economies work. Do you have any thoughts on this? Is the IMF thinking about this?
The IMF is thinking about it. We actually are going to bring this topic in the debates at the annual meetings in Marrakesh this year. What we are looking into is how it could help with productivity. Over the last decades, productivity growth has been very slow, and that impacts economic growth. But also, what are the implications for labor market? What jobs would appear, disappear? What does it mean for skilling, reskilling, upskilling people? What are the risks that artificial intelligence can bring in terms of the functioning of our societies? These are very, very big questions, and we would look at them from macro financial stability and growth standpoint. There are those who can bring the ethical, moral aspects of it. We have to have a holistic view on something that is certainly moving very, very rapidly.
Well, I'm glad you've had a wonderful trip here in India, and it's been fascinating to chat with you as always, from India's economic growth to AI in the future, and of course global concerns. Refreshing as always. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.